is pretty easy to find. Tanarabana. Tanar v'kirayim chadashim. The ovens, new ovens, harayin kachala kelim, hanaytlim b'chatzer. That they're like any other of the vessels, and one's permitted to use a new oven. Now, avol in sakeray shem, you're not allowed to smear oil over it. Vintasin ois b'matlas, and you're not allowed to wipe it down with a wipe or a wet towel. And the reasons are for these two actions are the sort of the way they used to finish. It's a brand new oven, and these were the finishing actions on the oven. So we don't want you to look as if we don't want you to finish off the process. Also, you're not allowed to throw cold water all over it because that's how they used to harden the ovens. That would also not be permissible in order to harden, as we saw before. But if you're throwing water on it in order to help the cooking process, then it will be permitted. Now, Tan Rabbanan. So now we're by the next two dots. Tan Rabbanan. Molgen that one goes ahead and the way you could go ahead and get the feathers off a chicken on Yom Tiv is used to scorch quickly throw the feet and the head. You could put those into hot water very quickly, or throw hot water over it in order to, it's easier to get the feathers out. Or you could singe them with a fire in order, again, to be able to make it easier to remove the feathers. And you're not allowed to pour some type of charisis is a type of a it's a type of it's something that actually helps you remove the feathers. These are all items that the sid is tar, so you can just rip it off. That's not permissible on Yom Tov. You cannot cut them either. Fine. Now, you're not go ahead and cut vegetables with its specific type of clippers. That's also forbidden because that is it's a tircha. It's hard. I'm not sure that's right. Hold on. No, because it looks like the reason is because it looks like you cut them that day. If you're using the clippers to cut the vegetables, it looks like as if you went outside and clipped them freshly today, which of course is forbidden. Umaskin, now, however, what you are allowed to do, avol maskin es hakundus vis ha'chayviyos. Now these are, I don't know what they are. You're allowed to go ahead and prepare these vegetables. Now these vegetables, Rashi explains, were very hard to deal with, and I may think it's forbidden because it's you're exerting yourself a little too much on Yom Tiv, and we say no, it's permitted. It's permitted to. That is not a problem. I don't know. You let to deal with them. You let to prepare these type of vegetables. Now, I don't know what vegetables are, but whatever it is, again, they were hard to prepare. Now, I think you should not use these vegetables on Yom Tov because they cause a lot of exertion there. But so we say it's fine. But also, one is permitted to go ahead and use a huge oven. It's an extra large oven is permitted. One is permitted to go ahead and heat up water in a large urn. One is not allowed to go ahead and use one of these new giant ovens because at that point we are afraid that it might go ahead and it might break, and then end being that you end up doing it for no reason. Now the last halach over here before the Mishnah Rabbanan. That one is not supposed to go ahead and use the bellows on Yom Tiv to fan the fire. But you could blow it with a pipe into the flame in order to fan it. You're not allowed to fix a spit, nor are you allowed to sharpen it. You're not go ahead and break open a reed in order to make roast fish on it. So you take the reed, you split it in half, and then the inside is flat. So it would be a very nice surface. If you spread that out nicely, you have a nice flat surface. That is forbidden.
I'm going to grow my fish that way next week.
Yeah, enjoy. Or like bamboo is a good example also, right? Bamboo, if you split it open, it'll be very nice and flat. One could go ahead and break a walnut with by wrapping it up in a towel. And we're not afraid that you're going to end up ripping the towel. And the way they used to go ahead and break these walnuts was either with a hammer, or perhaps it was with your hand, with the hand themselves. Okay, now we're up to the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, on the bottom of 34a. Says the Mishnah. Va'aid Amra Velazar Aimid Adam al Hamuksa. One is permitted to stand over the muksa. Now, I'll preface it. This heads up. This is a hard piece, so you have to. Hopefully, we get through this. We're going to the end of the parak, but it's extremely hard. So says the Mishnah. Va'aid Amar Rabbi Lazar. So also Rabbi Lazar says as follows: Amir al muksa. Someone is permitted to stand over the muksa. Now, the muksa is we had this previously. The idea of muksa is something. We're on the bottom lamdal and amanal. The idea of muksa is when you used to go ahead and create raisins, dry raisins. You take the grapes, which were edible, then you put them out to dry. At some point along the line, they become unedible, and then they come dried out, and they're fully dried out. Now they are edible. So that if they're fully edible, then you're fine. They're not muksa. You don't have to set them aside for Shabbos because they're fine. They're food. Now at the stage where they're sort of edible, but some people would eat them, some people would not eat them. At that point, that's called the muksa, and you need a das. You actually have to set them if you like them at this stage. You have to set them aside in order to eat them on Shabbos or Yom. So now we turn to so someone's allowed to stand over the semi-finished raisins. Now we turn to the top of Lamed Daled on the face. Erev Shabbos, before Shabbos. Bishvius on a Shvius year, and we'll see later on. But the reason why it's a Shvius year because there's no problem with Meister. On Shvius, you weren't allowed. And the Shvius is when everything is Hefer. Everything's open to the public, and therefore there's no Trumas to Meisters really during Shvius. So we took care of that issue, and it's going to come back to, I guess, haunt us later on. V'amar mikan, and then you say verbally, ani yochel l'machar. You point to the area, the general area. I'm going to eat from here tomorrow. Now the next day,
what is Shvius?
we're going to see because we're coming to learn from here that there's no meiser. For now, the point is there's no meiser. There's no chiv of meiser. V'amar mikan ani yochel l'machar. And the next day, without having to take off meiser, because it's shvius anyway, you could come the next day, take what you want. So as long as you point to the general area, you could go take what you want. The rabbis hold until you actually mark it off, and you have to say exactly, I'm going to eat from this specific spot. Then it's going to be permitted. So again, we have the basic argument between Rabbi Lazar and the rabbis is that do you have to say from the general? Could you say from the general area? I'm going to take this I'm making this non-muksa because for some people it is unedible. For some people it is edible, and it's not. Its process wasn't fully finished. So according to Rabbi Lazar, you could just say generally, and it's sort of generally from this area I'll eat it. Whatever you do take on Yom Tov will sort of be like breira, and it will as if it's choosing on its own. And according to Chacham, no, you have to be extremely specific. Now the Gemara is really not going to go into that machlekes. The machlekes between, at least the Gemara we're going to cover, is pretty much talking about the meiser issue. So again, let's focus on meiser again. We said that you last on the Erev Shabbos on Shvius, on the 7th year, Shemitah, this year. And then you had to say verbally, I'm going to be taking from here. So now the point of Shvius again is that there is no issue of meiser. And we could assume, coming to teach you specifically because there's no issue of meiser. However, if there would be a problem, if it wouldn't be Shvius, then you might have an issue. You, by designating this to use for Shabbos, you might have to take off meiser, even though it's not fully processed. Now we'll come back to that in further down in the Amud. So it starts the Gemara. Now, before we start the Gemara, the way for someone to be chayiv in meiser, to chayiv to take off at 10% for the Levium, the way it usually works is that A, it has to be fully processed, and B, you have to have taken it into your house. Roy Panei Bayis, you have to have taken it to your courtyard or take it through the doors of your house. If you don't have either of them, then usually there's no obligation to take off 10% at all, and you're able to go ahead and eat from it, or at least snack on it. Now, Tanan Hasan, we learned over there. Tinaikais, we have that children, and the reason we're saying children is nothing. Rashi says there's nothing specific why children, but we are saying that children could affect the meiser process. They have enough of. We understand they have enough das. They have enough of enough of an intellect to cause issues for meiser. If shetamnu, they hid it. Te'inim erev Shabbos, they hid figs on before Shabbos. V'shachlu, and they forgot about it. V'lo yasru, and they never took off meiser. L'maitzei Shabbos lo yachlu elim keinasher. Then when it comes to maitzei Shabbos, you're only allowed to go ahead and eat them if you take off meiser. So this halacha is telling us that if you have food which is fully processed, but was never taken into the house, children, just you saying that I want to use this for Shabbos, even though you didn't take it into the house, you set it aside for Shabbos outside the house, that's enough of an issue to make you have to take off Meiser. Meaning you by designating it to be used on Shabbos, is enough to make it that is obligated to take off Meiser. Even though you didn't take it into the house, Shabbos itself is Kaveya. That's the word we're going to keep on using, Kaveya. Shabbos itself is Kaveya, and it's set that this item is ready to be eaten, and therefore you have to go off and you have to take off Meiser. And if you've got to take off Meiser Erev Shabbos, you have to take it off Meiser Shabbos, and it will be unedible. It's forbidden to eat until you take off Meiser. So again, setting aside for Shabbos, fully functional food, fully processed food is going to be Kaveya. The Tananam we also learned, Hamaver Te'inim Bechetzrein. If one goes ahead and he brings in the figs into his chatzar, now at that point, once you bring something into the chatzar, really, it's ready. That's called you bring into your house, and there will be an obligation of meiser. In order for his children, and the people of his house to eat it, so they can eat it, and they're able to go ahead and eat it, and they're patur as long as they snack on it. Now, why is that permitted? He already brought it into the house. Bring into the house should make it as kaveya for meiser, and there should be an obligation for meiser. So the answer is not fully processed. So again, we saw the flip side of the halacha. That's food which is not fully processed, even though you brought it into the house, it still does not have an obligation for meiser. So right now we have two halachas. So one halach that Shabbos, if you set aside food on Shabbos, food which is fully processed, which you not bring into your house. So usually there is no obligation of meiser. But if you say I want to use this for Shabbos, Shabbos is kaveya. The one does have to take off meiser for the food that you set aside for Shabbos, which you did not bring into your house, on condition that it's fully processed. The second halacha is telling you is that if you have non-fully processed food, you brought the figs into your chutzner, into your courtyard to dry out. At that point, even though you brought it into your house, but we said there's two conditions that makes an obligation of meiser. One is bringing it to the house, but others be fully processed. So even though you bring it to the house, if it's not fully processed, then we say that there's no obligation. You can snack on it without taking off meiser.
We're talking about the Shvius years.
No, the Shvius was the Mishnah. Now we're going to get back to that. Right now we're just saying general rules in the non-Shvius rule. Yeah. Now Boimine Rav Nachman. So Rava asked from Rav Nachman, Shabbos mahu tikva muksa l'meiser, v'davar shloi nigum malachta. So right now we learned. So we learned that we had two brights. One did teach you that if fully functional food, even though it's not brought into the house, Shabbos will make you obligated. Meiser will befall, the obligation of Meiser will befall on the food. But the question is now, what if it's not fully functional food? Like the case of our Mishnah. You're standing there and you have non-fully processed raisins or figs where it's not fully dried out. Some people would eat it, some people would not. That's enough to set aside as muksa, unless you designated it before Shabbos. Such food, what is the halacha of Shabbos? So if you designate food before Shabbos, which is muksa, which is not fully functional, do we say that it's going to so the case is talking about where you're setting aside food before Shabbos, which is not fully processed. Do we say kivin dechsid v'krasa l'Shabbos einig? Since we have the verse that tells you that we call Shabbos a delight, kaveya. So therefore it's going to be kaveya fil davar shlenig malachta, even something which is not fully functional. So since the Torah calls it a delight, so any food which you eat on Shabbos, we say that this is fully processed food. It's functional processed food. Now, so the Torah tells you you're not snacking on it. So any food which you eat on Shabbos is not called snacking. It's called you're sitting down to a delightful meal. So therefore, even though it's not fully processed, if you eat food which you set aside, of course you have to set aside before Yom. If it's not fully processed, you have to set it aside before Yom Tiv, right? Because otherwise it's muksa. So if you did set aside food before Yom Tiv and you eat it on Shabbos or Yom Tiv, if you eat it on Shabbos, is that enough to now that eating food is not called snacking on Yom Shabbos? Any food you should eat on Shabbos is called a full suda. It's called a delight. It's called a treat. So therefore, is that enough to say that now you're chayiv in meiser? Or perhaps the davar shenig malachta kaveya. Then no, only something which you snack on. Again, we're going back to the first price, which you said that Shabbos is kaveya. So is that only, so when Shabbos is kaveya because you ate it on Shabbos, and that will make you obligated in Maisha, even though you did not bring it into the house, that only on food which is fully processed. But something which is not fully processed, you are not going to ahead and Shabbos not kaveya to make it into the obligation of Meiser.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
please again. Definition kaveya.
So kaveya means that the halacha with Meiser is that you could snack on it, but you're not allowed to eat it in a meal. So we want to say that when we say kaveya is that when, for example, take Shabbos, eating on Shabbos will kaveya in your mind. This food is a full meal, and there will be an obligation for Meiser or not. Okay. Now, another idea, halacha of kaveya, if you bring it into your house, fully processed food, that is kaveya meiser. There's there's an obligation to go ahead and take off meiser. Now, so that's our question. Our question is, if you have non-fully processed food, which of course you have to set aside before Shabbos, you, by going ahead and eating on Shabbos, is that kaveya or not? Okay, established. So Amrlei. So what's our answer? Shabbos kaveas beim davar shniglam lachtoi, bein shadavar shniglam lachtoi. The answer is we're going to say that no, Shabbos does establish that one does have to go ahead and even non-fully processed food, if you eat it on Shabbos, and now it has established and triggered the obligation for one to take off meiser. That was his answer. So, who asked who? Rav Nachman. So that's Rav Nachman's answer. Rav Nachman said, even if it's not fully processed, if you eat it on Shabbos, it has triggered the need for meiser. Now Amar Lei, so Rava said back to Rav Nachman, the Ema Shabbos dumya de chatzar. Perhaps Shabbos is like has the same halachic status of a chatzar, of a courtyard. Ma chatzar, just like a courtyard. Einay kivas el davar shniglam lachtoi. That it only will be, if you bring it into your house, not only does it have to be brought into your house or your courtyard, it also has to be fully processed. Only fully processed food, which is brought into your house, will have the obligation of meiser. Shabbos, also Shabbos, like perhaps also Shabbos, even though that eating food on Shabbos will only establish the need for, and the obligation of meiser only if it's fully processed food. So we want to say that you want to say that even if it's not fully processed food, which is eaten on Shabbos, will require meiser. Say no. Why? Why is it any worse than chatzar, than your house? And in your house, it's only fully obligated if you actually. It's only fully the obligation only falls on the food only if it's fully processed. So Amrlei.
So what does Shabbos do? Takes the place of chatzar.
So Shabbos would take the place of chatzar, right? Even if once it's fully processed. You, by eating it, you have established that this is a full meal, and it's not just snacking, and it takes. Also, it takes the place. For example, let's say you have meiser. You're out in the field. You have fully processed food, and you take a whole bunch. We're gonna get to Mishnah later on, right? You're not snacking on it. You take like 20 dates, and you put them into your plate. At that point, there's an obligation of meiser, right? Because you have established you're not just snacking on it. You're actually eating. You want this food as a meal. Therefore, at that point, so Shabbos takes the place of a chatzar, but also takes the place of even just taking one piece of it for a snack. That is enough to tell us that's Shabbos Einig. Shabbos is a delight, so there's no such thing as snacking on Shabbos. Taking food is establishing the need for meiser. So Amrlei. So he said back. So right now we're holding is that why are you saying that Shabbos would even trigger the need for meiser on unprocessed, on semi-processed food? Perhaps it's only on processed food. He said, no, we have a established set halacha in our hands. The Shabbos establishes the need for meiser, whether it is fully processed or not fully processed. So therefore, Rashi explains, if you set it aside before Shabbos, then it's going to be, you have to take off meiser, and after Shabbos it will be forbidden without meiser. If you don't set it aside before Shabbos, then when you eat it on Shabbos, if you're outside your house, let's say, for example, fully processed food outside your house, which never befell upon it the obligation of meiser, if you start snacking on it, if you start eating it on Shabbos outside your house, there will be an obligation of meiser after Shabbos. Now, Amar Mar Zutra, Braid Rav Nachman. So Mar Zutra, the son of Nachman, Afanam Nami Tanina, that we could prove from our Mishnah that the halacha is that non-fully processed food will be obligated with meiser once you decide to eat it on Shabbos. Why? Because in our Mishnah it said, "V'oid amar Rabbi Lazar, oy min adam ala muksa." Someone could stand by non-fully processed food, erev Shabbos, before Shabbos, b'shvius, on Shvius, and say, "I want to eat from here." Now, time of the Shvius. Why? We said we'll come back to this. So, why is it that the Mishnah said anything about Shvius, anything about Shemitah? L'abar surahu. It's because Shvius there's no obligation of taking Meiser on Shvius. However, Bishar Shnei Shavua, but by the other 6 years of the cycle, Hachinami Daser, it will be forbidden. My time out why? La Mishum the Shabbos Kavaloi. Is it not because Shabbos was not Kaveya? So right now our question is La Mishum Shabbos is Kaveya. So we're saying like this is that the only reason by standing on Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, and going ahead and designating food to be eaten on Shabbos, the only reason why it's permitted with that is because the only reason there's no other thing you have to do besides for designating for Shabbos is because there's no Shemitah, because there's no Meiser. There's no Meiser because there's no Shemitah. But if it would be any other year, there'll be another issue that you have to jump over, another issue to taking care of once you set it aside, and that would be taking off Meiser. So we proved from here that now we're talking about muksa, which is non-fully functional food, right? It's not fully processed. It's the raisins, which some people would eat, some people wouldn't. It's not fully dried out. So yes, some people yes, some people no. So it's muksa. So that means you have to set it aside. And you now on Shvius, you can set it aside without doing anything else. But other years you still have to take off meiser. So we see from here non-fully processed food. If you would designate that for Shabbos, you will have to take off meiser. So why are you saying that it's a set halacha, meaning it's sort of like a tradition passed down from master to student? But when you have a Mishnah that seems to be hinting clearly to the fact that if it wouldn't be a Shemitah year, if you designate non-processed food, there will be an obligation to take off meiser. So we see Shabbos does establish for semi-functional food, semi-processed food, that there is a need for meiser. So that's our question. Why not just prove it from the Mishnah? So we say like Shani Hasam, our mission is a little different. Kivin the Amar Mikanani Oichel. You said the word from here, I will eat, meaning you established it with your mouth. You verbally said this is food, regardless of Shabbos. You said this is food. So just like you sitting down to taking 20 figs off the pile and eating from it, that establishes that these figs is not just a snack, it's your meal. So when you stand there Erev Shabbos and say, this is my food for Shabbos, you said the word food. The word food itself is enough to establish that there's a need for meiser. So Lamachar, you said so it must be at that point there's a kvius, as an established. This is established. It established on it the obligation and triggered the need for meiser. So don't come and prove to me that because it's not that Shabbos designated it, it's you calling it food. Now we say Yahaki Mayer Shabbos Afil B'chol Nami. So why Shabbos even during the week? If I stand over food, which is semi-processed, and I say this is my meal today, you said it verbally. That triggers the need for meiser. So who cares about Shabbos? Nothing to do with Shabbos. It's what you said. Now we say Hakamashman. You said you're right. It is true. There's really no difference between Shabbos and weekday. Then why are we mentioning Shabbos in the Mishnah? The answer is a tevel. We're learning out another addition by saying Shabbos. We learn out an additional halacha. The tevel muchan hu eitzel Shabbos. That tevel. Now tevel is the food which have yet to take anything truma meiser soft. So it's the food which mixed some of its meiser and some of it is. You have yet to take off the meiser, so it's forbidden. Muchan hu eitzel Shabbos. It's already called that it's a prepared for Shabbos, and it's not necessarily muksa. She'im avar v'tiknoi musukan. That if you go ahead and you do take off meiser on Shabbos, it is a tukkan. So even though I might think that if I have tevel, meaning food, if I have a pile in front of me, which I didn't take off the meiser from it, I'm thinking on Shabbos that it's muksa machmas iser, that it should be fully muksa because it's something which I'm not allowed to eat it because of a halacha. I cannot eat it because it's usr. It's forbidden to eat because I didn't take off the tevel. That we learn from here that really there is no problem, and you could technically, and therefore, even if you went ahead and you set it aside even though you set it aside that you want to eat it, now I might think that you didn't take off the meiser yet, so it should be tevel. You say no, there's no problem of unmeisered food of being muksa on Shabbos. So we have additional halacha. That's not the point. The point is that we're learning. I'm not sure what the point in the Mishnah, which point the Mishnah wants to focus on. But at the end of the day, this Mishnah is not a proof to the idea of unprocessed food of Shabbos establishing the need for taking off mice of the need for meiser on unprocessed food. Okay, now we turn to the top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. I'm going to ask a question on that. So right now we're holding that we have dibur, the power of the word is enough to establish the need for meiser on unprocessed food. Now we say, is that really true? So the halacha is that if we want to prove as follows, that the halacha is that if you took off, let's say you took off a large amount of you have a pile and you took off 20 figs. That's a large amount. Now what halacha is, and not to stack on it, to fully eat. And at the end of the day, you only took one from the plate. You could take the remaining 19. And now remember that there's no obligation to take off meiser if you're just snacking. So technically, if I go to the pile and take off one date, there's no obligation to go ahead and take off meiser. But if you take off 20, or Gemara says 10, you take off 10, then there is an obligation. So let's say I separate 10. But at the end of the day, I'm too busy, I only eat one. You're allowed to take the remaining 9 and put them back into the pile. And there's no obligation for meiser. Now, seemingly, it's a little funny, because you, by taking off, you did an action. You separated 20. And in that case, you're allowed to put them back. So why are you allowed to put them back? You would think that you, by removing 20, which is an action, that should be enough to establish the need for meiser. Now, if that is not, and then we're going to see in a minute, the Rabbi Boruch holds of this idea. They're able to return it. So now we will ask in a minute, but so what are you telling us? According to Rabbi Boruch, you could remove. You could do an action and not do a full action as long as you don't eat it. There's no full requirement to take off the meiser. So why is saying something any worse? So why is it just by saying that this is going to be meiser, this is going to be eaten on Shabbos? Why is that enough to establish the need? Right? We're saying that it's not that Shabbos is kaveya, the food. It's not the Shabbos in the Mishnah. The Shabbos, the fact that you're eating on Shabbos makes you now have to eat meiser. Saying no, but the reason is because you said this is my food. But we see that if you do an action and remove 20 pieces, that itself is not enough to establish the meiser, unless you eat the 20. If you only eat one, we can return them. So if the action is not requiring you to take off meiser, so why is just verbally saying something, this is my food, is going to require you to take off meiser, right? There could be no way that saying something is stronger than an action. So that's going to be our question. So we start again from the top of 30. We're up to the top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph 35a. But really, dibur is really saying something so strong. But even if you actually physically remove something, you can return it. And we hear this from Rabbi Lazar. The Amar, he says, that whenever you go ahead and you take food and you return it, it's not kaveya. And now the action was not enough, there wasn't enough to trigger the obligation to say that now it's established food, and therefore you're chayiv in meiser. Tanakh we learn, hanaitel zeisim min ma'atin. If someone takes out olives from a vat, toivel achas b'melech oichel. If you take out one, you dip it into salt and you can eat it. As long as you're doing one at a time, we call that a snack. Each of them is a snack, and therefore you're not obligated in meiser. Now, but if you take out 10 chayiv, now you're obligated because you did an action. You separated 10 olives. That's a large enough of not to call. That's no longer called a snack. That's called a meal, and you trigger the need for meiser. Rabbi Lazar holds min hama'atin tahar chayiv. Then Rabbi says as follows. It's not so simple. If you're taking from a vat which is going to be pure, meaning it's not impure, it's tahar, then you're chayiv. Then just by taking away 10, already at that point you're chayiv in meiser. Min hamatin tamei pater. But if you take out 10 from a vat which is tamei, which is impure, then you're not obligated yet. Why? Meishu machzer es hameiser, because you're able to return it. And we come to the end, ma'ishna reisha, and then we say fine. So right now, where we are is that. I'll continue. So right now we have Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar holds that if you take 10 olives from at one shot from a vat and they're all pure, then we say that you're obligated meiser right away. And if it's impure, then you could return it, and you're not chayiv in meiser. And we ask, what's the difference? According to Rabbi Lazar, what makes a difference if you take 10 from something which is pure or you take something which is impure? And Ravo answers Reisha b'ma'at and tahar, the gaver tamin. So the answer for the first case is that we're talking about a vat which is pure, but the person is impure. So you, by taking it out, once he touched the olive, you can't return it to the vat because you're going to make the entire vat impure. He can't return it. So we see a seifa. In the second case is matan tami the gaver tami. You're talking about someone who's impure and the vat is impure. So you, by taking one out, doesn't stop you. The fact that since the vat's impure also, as long as and you're also impure, there's nothing stopping you to return it. But the point is, the masti mahadil. We see that you're allowed to return it. So we see that according to Rabbi Lazar himself, taking off 10 olives from a vat, which is a large action, does not trigger the obligation for meiser. There's no obligation to take off meiser. And as long as you can return it, which would require both to be, in this case, the vat to be impure and yourself to be impure, but as long as you can return it, there's no obligation for meiser. So again, we return to our original question. According to the Gemara, we're saying that the reason in the Mishnah that you're not, the reason why in the Mishnah that in a non-Shemitah year you would be required to take off meiser, not because of Shabbos is establishing the need for meiser. Rather, it's the fact that you said this is food. And then we say, how could just saying this is food require the need to take off meiser if an action doesn't do it? So saying it for sure shouldn't cut it. And if that's true, it would end up being that the reason in the Mishnah that we're really trying to get to is the reason in the Mishnah that one has to take off meiser is not because of saying this is food, but because of Shabbos. That's what we really want to get to. So first we propose that we want to say that we see from the Mishnah that saying that you can eat it on Shabbos, that establishes the need for meiser. Then we say no, it's not the need for Shabbos. It's not Shabbos. It's really the fact that you said this is food. Now we're asking that this is food can't cut it because if an action doesn't do it, this is food can't do it. So must be we're left with we want to get to the point where the need in the Mishnah, the requirement to take off meiser and non-Shemitah year would be because of Shabbos. Or we answer is say no. Masisa nami. So we want to say in our Mishnah also, the muksa tahar, the gaver tamrei, the matzi mahadele. We want to say no, it's the same case. In the case of the Mishnah, we're saying, so even you want to say that Rabbi Lazar holds that if one returns it, or that one could return it. So we want to say is that, in the case of the Mishnah, is that the muksa was tahar, that the raisins that he was taking from, the semi-processed raisins, the semi-dried out raisins, was pure. And it was a person that was impure. So him, by taking it, he's not allowed to return it. So we want to say is that even in the case of the Mishnah, it's just like the case of the olives, which were pure, and the person that was impure. Once you take it, you have to go ahead and you have to go ahead and take off the meiser. But in a chanami, if the case of the Mishnah would have been when both the food and the person was impure, perhaps there would be no obligation until you actually eat it. That's what we want to answer. And that we say no. And our answer is v'haloi. We say no. You can't compare the two cases because in the case of the Mishnah, he never took it yet. All he said was this will be food for Shabbos. He never touched it. And afalpikin, even so, we still say that in a non-Shemitah year you would have to take off meiser. You can't give that as an answer. So El Amarav Shimi Barashi. So at the end of the day, we're going to fall back to the original answer. Say that we're going to say Shabbos is really Shabbos is kaveya. And the reason the Mishnah is not because of Dibor. We wanted to say that we don't tell me from the Mishnah that it's Shabbos that establishes the need for meiser. Rather, it's the Dibor to saying this is food or saying no. Really, it is Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Lazar ka Amrit, and Rabbi Lazar was saying as follows. Now, Rabbi Lazar Klataima and Rabbi Lazar was going to his reasoning. Amar Truma Kavas v'Kolskein Shabbos. According to Rabbi Lazar, he holds that Truma is Kaveya. So for sure Shabbos is Kaveya. Now, we're going to say as follows, that it's true. In the case of the Mishnah, Rabbi Lazar does hold that Shabbos establishes the need for, if you eat food on Shabbos or you set aside food on Shabbos, it establishes the need to take off meiser. That can't be our, now, that you might think that's a good answer for the Gemara's question. So why did the Gemara say we have an established halacha that semi-processed food which is set aside for Shabbos will be semi-processed food which is set aside for Shabbos will require meiser? Then Gemara asks, we have a Mishnah. We say, no. You can't bring the proof from the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah is Rabbi Lazar, and he's a Yachid. He's the only one that holds us. He's a Das Yachid. He's only one who holds as far, and he even holds himself that Truma is Kaveya. That even taking off Truma, which takes place before Meiser, even Truma itself, which I think they took off in the field. So even truma itself already starts the process that one is required to take off meiser. The Tank is learned. That if you take off truma before before the food was fully processed, that according to Rabbi Lazar, you can't even snack on it because it requires meiser. And the rabbis permit it. So it's Rabbi Elazar. So you can't bring a proof from our Mishnah to the overall halacha if Shabbos is kaveh or not, because Rabbi Elazar is extremely stringent. He holds, he's extremely stringent. He holds once you take off truma already, you're required to go ahead and take off meiser, and you can't snack on it. So the fact that Shabbos does the same thing, that's not a proof. That doesn't help us out. We go like the rabbis. The rabbis hold that truma doesn't take it off. So who said Shabbos? Truma doesn't trigger the need for meiser. So who said Shabbos requires it? And don't bring proof from Rabbi Lazar. Okay, so at the end of the day, we're coming out. It's true. According to Rabbi Lazar, Shabbos is kaveya. Shabbos will trigger the need to take off truma, and it's a good proof from our Mishnah. But we didn't go like Rabbi Lazar. So very nice, you have a proof. That's not going to answer our question. How we act in our daily life is not going to be an answer from Lazar because we follow the rabbis. Now, Tashma, we want to bring another ayah. Tashma Seifa, perhaps we could bring a proof from the Seifa. The Seifa said, the end of the Mishnah said, V'chamam Aimrim, Achi Yirshum V'yomer Makan Vatkan. The rabbi said, until you say, I want to take from, they said you have to mark it off. You have to say specifically, if you have semi-processed food and you want to eat it on Shabbos, you have to say, I want to eat it exactly, the exact area. You just can't wave your hand and say from this area. You have to say exactly which specific area it's going to be. Now, Taima, the reason is the Erev Shabbos, B'shvius La Bar Sirhu. The reason is that you're able to go ahead and do that because it's Erev Shabbos on it's on the case of it's on the Shemitah year where you have to take off meiser. But in the rest of the years of Shavuos, the Bnei Asurim, where you would have to take off meiser, it would be forbidden until you take off meiser. So that which you want to say for Rabbi Lazar, we're saying for the rabbis. Now, if we could prove for the rabbis that it's the only reason why it's permitted to go ahead, the only reason you could just mark off an area Erev Shabbos of on semi-dried out raisins, which is usually muksa, but you are saying that I want it. So now that means Shabbos is establishing it. Now, and we're saying it's a case of Shemitah. So even for the rabbis, the only reason you're allowed to go ahead and eat it is because it's Shemitah year. But if it's a non-Shemitah year, you by marking off an area and saying, I want this to be eaten on Shabbos, that itself will be kaveya and trigger the need for meiser. So now we found the proof. According to the rabbis, now we have a good proof. According to the rabbis, we have that semi-dried out food, it's a semi-processed food, will require meiser if you want to use it for Shabbos. And I would say, like, Shani Hasam came to Amar Mikan Vatkan Ani Yochel. You pointed it out. You said, I want to eat from here to here. Therefore, until the next day. Sorry, I'll repeat it. Shani Hasam came to Amar Mikan Vatkan Ani Yochel. Since you want to say from here, you said the exact point of where you want to eat. So, kaveya. That's why it's kaveya. That's why he establishes the need for it, because you verbally said this is food. Yeah, and just like this is the same answer we had before. And I would say, Shabbos afil b'chol. So why are we talking about Shabbos? Even during the weekday, if you say this is my food, then it should also establish the need to take off meiser, even though it's non-processed, semi-processed food. And we said semi-processed food usually does not require any need for meiser. But you by saying this is food, even during the weekday, it should establish the need. So we answer is a tevel muchanhu. So we said that no, you're right, and even during the weekday that would be an issue. If you say this, if you have a food if you have food and you say this is my food and it's, let's say, outside the house or it's not fully processed, we'll say then there's a requirement for meiser. There's nothing special about Shabbos. So why are we mentioning Shabbos? To teach you a new halacha, like we mentioned before, tevel muchanhu Shabbos, shem avar v'tiknu bin tzukah. That if you go ahead and now own that the rabbi, that midaraisa, biblically, one is permitted to take off meiser on Shabbos. Just the rabbis made a takana, made a decree, you shouldn't. But it's not going to make it muksa in itself. The fact that it's tevel, the fact you didn't take off meiser, does not make something muksa. Okay, so we're still left with no proof of. So our original question is unprocessed food. Is Shabbos established the need for one to meiser unprocessed food? If you say I want to eat this on Shabbos, or you actually eat it on Shabbos. So the answer is that we don't have an answer from our Mishnah, and we're just left with the saying from Rav Chisda that we have an established halacha that it does. Okay, but the point is that we can't prove it from Mishnah. Now we're going to continue a little further. Raminu, verminu, and I'll ask you. We're going to ask a contradiction. If one is eating from a grapevine, now Rashi explains that usually, for the most part, by default, grapevines are not gomer. That it's malachta in a gomer. Its work is not fully processed. So we'll look at it as if it's non-processed food, because usually grapes are used for the vat, for the wine, and once in the processing you remove it from the cluster, right? You don't process the grapes with its vine in the cluster. You remove the stems first. So therefore, if you're munching on a grape on grapes, and it's still on the vine, that's called that the food is not fully finished. And therefore, usually there's no need for meiser, right? So let's say you're doing it and you walk into your courtyard. Now, walking to the courtyard usually makes it the one is required to take off meiser. Rabbi Lezer said you could continue eating. Rabbi Shua Amar Allah Yigmar, and Rabbi Shua says you don't have to continue. Now we say also, Allah Yigmar, and Rabbi Shua says no, you got to stop and take off meiser. Now Chashecha, let's say you don't walk into your courtyard, you're munching on your olives off the vine or off the cluster, and all of a sudden Shabbat, and then it's nightfall Friday night. What's the halacha? Rabbi Lezer Amar Yigmar. Rabbi Lezer says you could continue. Rabbi Shua Amar Allah Yigmar. Rabbi Shua says you can't continue. But now we have a question, and we prove that, at least according to Rabbi Lezer, non-fully processed food, if you're eating it on Shabbos, there is a requirement for meiser. So if he's munching on his grapes off the cluster, which is not fully processed, and then Shabbos comes and he's continuing to eat it, that will require the need for meiser. So how could he continue eating it? So we're going to change around the words. That when he's eating his cluster and he walks into his chatzar, Rabbi says, no, you can't eat in your chatzar. Get out of your courtyard to finish eating, because if not, you're chayiv and meiser. We have to insert into the words of Rabbi Lezer, not that you could continue munching on it into Shabbos, rather stop and wait till Meitzah Shabbos, continue eating, because halach is, according to Rabbi Lezer, if you have non-fully processed food, if you're eating on Shabbos, that establishes the need for meiser. Okay. Tomorrow, I'm not going to be, Monday and Thursday, I'm not going to be here. Rabbi Skolnick's going to give Daf Yomi.
Who is?
Rabbi Skolnick. Okay, everyone have a great day.
You as well. So if I take